You're nothing but a useless old hag." My own son spat those words in my face while the family laughed. I went to bed in tears. But the next day he was on his knees begging for the only help only I could give. If you think a mother deserves to be treated like this, think again. Subscribe to the channel to hear stories of overcoming difficulties, like mine, where we show that it's never too late to regain your dignity. Now I'll tell you how it all began. My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've always believed that family was everything in life. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where family ties were sacred and unbreakable. My parents' first generation Irish immigrants taught me from an early age that blood is thicker than water, that family always comes first, no matter what. Words I've carried with me throughout my life, like a mantra, like a promise. I was the first in my family to attend college studying literature at Ohio State University. It was there during my sophomore year at a spring dance that I met Robert. He was tall with piercing green eyes and a smile that lit up the room. He was studying business and dreamed of opening his own business one day. We fell in love quickly with that carefree intensity of youth. After just 6 months of dating, he proposed. We were 22, young, reckless, and completely in love. My parents warned me to wait to finish my studies first to be sure. But who listens to advice when you're in love? We got married in a small ceremony in my parents' garden with only close family and a few college friends in attendance. The first few years were difficult but wonderful in their own way. We both worked and studied. We lived in a tiny apartment near campus with hand-me-down furniture and big dreams. Robert worked part-time at an insurance company while he finished his degree, and I tutored English to supplement our income. We had little money, but we were rich in love and hope. In our 3rd year of marriage, I discovered I was pregnant. The news came as a surprise. We had planned to wait a few more years until we were more financially established. But life has its own plans. Robert received the news with a mixture of shock and joy. He hugged me tightly, twirled me around the living room of our small apartment, and promised we would be the best parents in the world. We decided I would temporarily take a break from college to focus on the pregnancy and the baby's first months. It was a difficult decision. I was only 1 semester away from graduation, but it felt like the right thing to do at the time. Robert promised we would work so I could return to school as soon as possible. A promise made with the best intentions, but which never came to fruition. Alexander was born on a cold January morning after 15 hours of labor. When they placed him in my arms, I felt a love I never imagined possible. He was perfect dark hair like Robert's, my nose, 10 tiny fingers and toes, a loud cry that announced his arrival into the world. Robert cried as he held him for the first time, vowing that our son would have all the opportunities we didn't. It was a promise we pledged to keep, no matter the cost. The first few months with Alex were a mix of extreme joy and utter exhaustion. Sleepless nights, painful breastfeeding, the constant worry that we were doing everything wrong. Robert did his best to help, but he worked long hours to compensate for me being home. My parents came to visit when they could, bringing home-cooked meals and offering a few hours of rest. They were difficult times, but also precious in their own way. When Alex was 6 months old, Robert received a job offer in Chicago, a management position at a marketing firm with significantly higher pay and real opportunities for advancement. The decision to move was difficult. It meant leaving behind our families, our friends, and the support network we had built. But it also represented an opportunity to offer Alex a better life, to finally move out of our cramped apartment and into a real home. We accepted the challenge. Our move to Chicago marked the beginning of a new chapter. We rented a small house in a middle-class neighborhood, bought a used car, and slowly began building a life that felt like something out of a modest American dream. Robert thrived in his new job frequently, receiving praise and small promotions. I remained at home with Alex, now with plans to return to school once he started preschool. The years passed. Alex grew strong and intelligent, always curious about the world around him. By age 3, he knew the entire alphabet and could count to 20 without error. His preschool teachers always commented on his intelligence and unusual ability to concentrate for such a young child. Robert and I were filled with pride with each new development, each new skill he acquired. It was when Alex was 4 years old that our lives changed dramatically. Robert had been complaining of persistent headaches for weeks. We attributed it to work stress, too long hours at the office. Until one day, while driving home, he fainted at the wheel. The accident wasn't serious. He hit a lamppost at low speed, but what the doctors discovered later was devastating, a brain tumor already in an advanced stage. Inoperable, they said. 6 months to a year to live with treatment. The news shattered our world. How to explain to a 4-year-old that his father was dying? How to face the prospect of losing my husband, my best friend, the love of my life? The following months were a blur of hospitals. Experimental treatments, specialists, second and third opinions. Robert fought, bravely determined to buy more time with us. But the cancer was relentless. He deteriorated rapidly, losing weight, strength, even the ability to speak clearly in the final stages. Alex was too young to fully understand what was happening, but he sensed the gravity of the situation. He stopped playing noisily around the house, started drawing pictures to make Daddy feel better, and asked when his dad could take him to the park again. Robert passed away on a quiet autumn afternoon at home, with Alex sleeping in the next room and me holding his hand. His last words were about our son. Take care of our boy. Let him know how much I loved him. I promised I would. And that promise became my life's mission. The funeral was small, with a few of Robert's coworkers, my parents, and some friends we'd made in Chicago. Alex stayed by my side throughout the service, his small hand clutched in mine, his wide eyes trying to comprehend why all those people were crying. That night, after everyone had left, he asked me when Daddy would be coming home. It was the question that broke the dam I'd built to contain my emotions. I wept openly, holding my son in my arms, trying to explain as gently as possible that Daddy had gone to a place he could never return from. The following months were the hardest of my life. There was the overwhelming grief, the loneliness of the nights, the pain of watching Alex search the house for his father. And there were also brutal practical issues, astronomical medical bills, a mortgage, daily expenses. Robert's life insurance helped initially, but he knew he would need to find a steady source of income. I went back to school, completing my BA in literature through night classes while working as a school secretary during the day. Alex attended the school's daycare, which made things easier. Logistically, though, the guilt of spending less time with him consumed me. My parents offered to move us back to Ohio to live with them, but I declined. Chicago had become our home, and there was something about the idea of starting over that felt unbearable. Besides, Alex had just begun adjusting to the new reality without his father moving. Cities, schools, and friends seemed too cruel. So we continued day after day, building a new normal. I worked, studied, cared for Alex, kept the house running. I slept 4 or 5 hours a night, subsisting on coffee and sheer determination. There was no room for dating, for socializing, for anything beyond survival, and making sure Alex had everything he needed. He was growing rapidly, increasingly resembling Robert physically, which was both a blessing and a constant pain. At age 7, Alex demonstrated an extraordinary aptitude for math and science. His teacher suggested he'd try out for a program for gifted children. The results confirmed what we already suspected: he had an exceptionally high IQ, especially in logical and mathematical reasoning. The school recommended a specialized program, which unfortunately was private and expensive. I looked at our tight finances and almost gave up on the idea. But then I remembered my promise to Robert to give Alex every opportunity possible. I took on a second job, waitressing on weekends, while my parents flew from Ohio once a month to stay with Alex. It was exhausting, but seeing his enthusiasm for the new program, the way his mind blossomed with the right challenges, made it all worthwhile. The elementary school years passed in a blur of school activities, science projects, and math competitions in which Alex often excelled. His intelligence was recognized by all, and he earned partial scholarships that helped ease the financial burden. I continued working hard now as an assistant professor at a local university, having completed a master's degree in education. It wasn't the path I'd envisioned for my life, but it provided a decent salary and hours that aligned with Alex's. Our life wasn't luxurious, but it was comfortable. I managed to buy a small house in a decent neighborhood with good schools. We had Sunday dinners, movie marathons, and backyard camping trips. Alex had some good friends, participated in extracurricular activities, and seemed like a happy, well-adjusted child despite his father's absence. Occasionally, he'd ask questions about Robert what he was like at my age, what he liked to do, what advice he'd give about a given situation. These conversations were always bittersweet, but I cherished the opportunity to keep Robert's memory alive for our son. When Alex entered high school, he began to show signs of change. Adolescence arrived like a storm, volatile moods, questioning rules, a desire for greater independence. It was normal, the books and school counselors assured me, but it was still difficult. The sweet, cooperative boy I knew was transforming into an assertive, sometimes rebellious young man who constantly tested boundaries. I tried to navigate these turbulent waters as best I could, setting clear boundaries while giving him room to grow and discover himself. I didn't always get it right. There were fights, slammed doors, icy silences that lasted for days. But overall, we maintained a fundamentally solid relationship. Or at least, that's what I thought. The real test came when Alex was a senior in high school preparing for college. With his exceptional grades, impressive extracurricular activities, and history of community service, something I always encouraged, he was accepted to several prestigious universities including MIT, Stanford, and Princeton. It was a dream come true, the culmination of all our efforts and sacrifices. But it also represented a monumental financial challenge. Even with partial scholarships and financial aid, the cost was astronomical. I sat with Alex one night, spreadsheets spread across the kitchen table, crunching and re-crunching numbers, trying to find a way to make this possible. One suggested starting at a community college and then transferring or choosing a state university with a strong computer science program, the field he wanted to pursue. For the first time, I saw a side of Alex that frightened me. His eyes, so similar to Robert's, hardened. His voice took on a cold tone I'd never heard before. I told him I'd worked my whole life for this moment, that I deserved to go to the best university, that it wasn't fair that he had to compromise his dreams for money. The words hit me like knives. Wasn't this what I'd taught him? Hadn't I set the example of working tirelessly, of sacrificing to achieve goals? Where was the sense of reality, the understanding that sometimes we need to make difficult choices? The argument escalated quickly, with Alex screaming that I was ruining his future, that I didn't care about his aspirations. Eventually, he slammed the door and spent the night at a friend's house. I lay awake all night thinking, crying, praying for guidance. What would Robert have done? Would he have supported Alex? Unconditionally moved mountains to make Stanford or MIT possible, or would he have insisted on a more realistic option? The next morning, I made a decision that would change the course of our lives. I called my parents and discussed the possibility of selling their house in Ohio, which had been sitting idle since they moved to a smaller apartment. It was my anticipated inheritance, they said, and if it would help Alex achieve his dreams, they would agree. I also decided to mortgage our house in Chicago to the maximum, cut all non-essential expenses, and accept a full-time administrative position at the university where I worked, which meant giving up the academic ambitions I had harbored for the past few years. When Alex returned home the next night, still tense but less hostile, I presented the plan. I explained that it would be difficult, that we would both have to make sacrifices, but that we would find a way to make Stanford his final choice possible. The relief and gratitude on his face almost offset the anxiety I felt about the financial decisions I was making. He hugged me tightly, murmuring thanks over and over, promising he would make it worth it, that he would graduate with honors, that he would get an amazing job, and that he would take care of me when I was older. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. The summer before Alex left for college was bittersweet. I helped him buy everything he needed for his dorm. We attended freshman orientation and made plans for visits and vacations. Beneath the excitement was a constant fear, not only of the debt I was taking on, but also of what my life would be like without him at home. For 17 years, my identity had been completely intertwined with motherhood, with caring for Alex, with being his everything. Who would I be when he left? These worries, however, took a back seat to the joy of seeing him achieve his dreams. The day of departure arrived all too quickly. I loaded the car with his things, drove the 12 hours to Stanford, and helped him settle into his dorm. I met his roommate, a boy named Trevor from Seattle, who seemed polite and responsible. I had an awkward conversation with Alex about alcohol, drugs, and consent. And then it was time to say goodbye. We hugged for a long time in the campus parking lot, both of us trying not to cry. I promised to call him every day at first, then backtracked and amended it too regularly. Not wanting to stifle his independence, he promised to study hard and take care of himself. The drive back to Chicago was the loneliest of my life. The first few weeks were difficult, adjusting to the empty house, the silence, the absence of sneakers scattered across the floor, and dirty dishes in the sink. I called Alex every other day at first, then spaced it out to twice a week, respecting his space. He always seemed busy chatting briefly about classes, new friends, fraternity parties. I sent money monthly as agreed for expenses beyond tuition and housing, which were covered by a combination of partial scholarships and the loans I'd taken out. Occasionally, I received extra requests for a spring break trip with friends, for a new laptop when his broke, for appropriate clothing for internship interviews. I always found a way to accommodate these requests, often by cutting back on my own needs. A missed breakfast here, a delayed repair there, a winter with the heat turned down lower than comfortable. Small sacrifices that seemed insignificant compared to the importance of supporting his success. Visits home during the holidays were short and increasingly far between. Alex always had planned summer internships, trips with friends, academic conferences. When he did come, he spent much of his time on the phone or computer connected to his life at Stanford, which was clearly more exciting and meaningful than anything in Chicago. It was during one of these brief visits at Christmas of her junior year that Alex introduced Caroline to us. She was beautiful, elegant, with an East Coast accent that hinted at a privileged upbringing. She was an economics major at Stanford from a wealthy Connecticut family, and she looked at our modest home with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. During dinner, as I served the roast I'd spent all day preparing, Caroline casually mentioned that her parents were taking her and Alex skiing in Aspen after New Year's. It was the first I'd heard about this trip. Alex had the decency to look uncomfortable, mumbling something about having forgotten to mention it, with plans to tell me later. The rest of the visit was a series of similarly awkward moments, with Caroline dominating the conversation, with stories of international travel dinners at exclusive restaurants and ambitious future plans that clearly included Alex. He in turn seemed transformed in her presence, adopting opinions he'd never expressed before, using words that weren't part of his usual vocabulary, laughing it inside, jokes that completely excluded me. When they finally left 3 days earlier than originally planned, Caroline had tickets to a show in New York. I felt a mixture of relief and profound sadness. Relief that I no longer had to keep up appearances, pretending Caroline's subtly condescending comments didn't affect me. Sadness because I realized I was losing my son to a world he would never belong to. Alex's graduation from Stanford was one of the proudest days of my life. Sitting in the audience, watching him receive his computer science degree with honors, I felt all the sacrifices had been worth it. He had landed an internship at Apple during the summers, and now he had a job offer at a promising startup in San Francisco, with a starting salary that made my eyes water when he mentioned the amount. Finally, I thought all the hard work was paying off. The ceremony was followed by an elegant dinner at an expensive restaurant paid for by Caroline's parents, now officially engaged to Alex, with a diamond ring that probably cost more than my car. I sat at the table trying to join in the conversations about San Francisco real estate and stocks, feeling increasingly out of place. Alex, sensing my discomfort, occasionally tried to include me, asking about my work or friends in Chicago, but these attempts always resulted in topics that quickly ran dry, highlighting how far our worlds had drifted apart. In the years that followed, I saw Alex only a few times a year. He was busy building his career, which was advancing at an impressive pace. He went from his initial startup to a leadership position at a larger company, then founded his own tech company with some Stanford classmates. Caroline, now his wife, after a lavish wedding in Napa, valley to which I contributed financially, far beyond my means, wanting to look good in front of her family, worked at an investment bank and supplemented Alex's already substantial income. They bought a house in Palo Alto, then a larger one in Atherton, one of California's most exclusive areas. The calls became more spaced out, the emails shorter, the visits more rare. When they invited me to California, I felt like a stranger in their home, certain about how the high-end appliances worked, uncomfortable with the maid who made my seed, who made my laundry, lost in conversations about investments and properties. Alex seemed equally uncomfortable during my visits, as if he no longer knew how to relate to me, as if I were a reminder of a life he'd left behind of origins that didn't match his current identity. Then came the news of the first grandchild. Carolyn was pregnant. The joy I felt was indescribable. A grandchild, a new generation, a chance to reconnect, to build new family bonds. I offered to go to California a few weeks before the birth to help with the preparations and stay a few weeks afterward to help with the baby. My offer was politely declined. Caroline had a doula, Alex explained over the phone, and her mother was already planning to stay with them for the first month. Perhaps I could visit later when things were more settled. I swallowed my disappointment and agreed. Intellectually understanding, though emotionally devastated. Olivia was born one morning in May. I received the news in a brief phone call from Alex, followed by photos emailed to me. She was perfect blonde hair like Caroline's, my Robert's green eyes, a serious expression reminiscent of Alex as a baby. I cried when I saw the photos, both with joy and sadness at not being there. Finally, 2 months after the birth, I was invited to meet my granddaughter. I saved for months to buy special gifts, researched the best baby clothing and toy brands, and prepared myself emotionally for the meeting. The week I spent at their house was a contradictory mix of emotions. The pure joy of holding Olivia, singing to her, watching her smile and move. The sharp pain of realizing how peripheral I was in that family. Caroline, consulting her mother, who apparently visited weekly on every Babai-related decision, Alex following his wife's instructions on how Olivia should be, raised me, being treated more like a welcome visitor than a grandmother. It was during this visit that I noticed subtle changes in Alex. He seemed constantly stressed, checking his phone every few minutes, working late even while on paternity leave. When I tried to talk to him about it, he admitted that things at the company weren't going well. They'd lost a key investor, a new product had failed, and the stock was falling. I expressed my concern, offered emotional support, and asked if there was anything I could do. He smiled tightly, thanked me, and changed the subject. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen before everyone else woke up, silently sipping coffee, gazing out the window at the immaculate garden. I sat with him, and for a moment it felt like we'd stepped back in time, just mother and son sharing a peaceful moment together. That's when he mentioned, almost casually, that he was facing financial difficulties. The household expenses, Olivia's birth, the company's instability, all had created unexpected financial pressure. He was considering selling some of his shares in the company to address the situation, but that would mean losing control and future earning potential. I listened intently, feeling a mixture of concern, and I admit a pang of validation that he was finally sharing something real with me, something beyond the facade of perfection he'd maintained for years. Then he asked the question that would change everything. Was a temporary loan possible? He'd remembered I'd mentioned a small inheritance I'd received after my parents' passing the previous year. It was true after a life of hard work and frugality. My parents had left me a modest sum that I saw as my retirement security. It wasn't a fortune, but it represented stability in my old age. The amount Alex mentioned, $200,000, was practically all I had. I felt my heart race, my mouth dry. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, without question. Wasn't this my life's purpose, to support my son, to ensure his success, his happiness? Hadn't I sacrificed everything for him? Before, why would it be any different now? But another part of voice that had grown stronger in the years of solitude warned me. I asked for time to think, to consult my accountant, to better understand the situation. Alex seemed surprised by my hesitation, perhaps even a little offended. He assured me it would only be a temporary loan, that he would pay me back with interest once the company stabilized again. I finally agreed to seriously consider and respond before returning to Chicago. The remaining days of my visit were tense. Caroline seemed colder than usual, as if Alex had shared our conversation with her. Interactions with Olivia were limited, always with Carolyn or the nanny nearby supervising. Alex was distant, distracted, often working in his home office with the door closed. The day before my departure, he found me in the guest room while I was packing. He asked bluntly if I had made a decision. The hope in his eyes, so similar to his father's, melted my last reservations. I said yes, I would make the transfer as soon as I returned to Chicago. The relief on his face was immediate, as was the gratitude he expressed. He promised again that it would be temporary, that I wouldn't regret it. We hugged, and for a moment I felt I had my son back. The transfer was made the following week after a brief consultation with my accountant, who expressed concerns I chose to ignore. Alex emailed a simple contract setting payment terms that would begin in 6 months. I signed and returned it, trusting the bond between mother and son more than any legal document. The following weeks brought a brief resurgence in our communication, frequent texts, even a few phone calls where Alex shared details about the company, about how things were starting to improve. We planned a visit for me for Olivia's 6th birthday. I began to feel hopeful, believing that perhaps this financial situation had somehow brought us closer together again. Then gradually, communication diminished. The messages became more spaced out, the calls shorter and more hurried. When I mentioned the planned visit, Alex suggested postponing it. Things were hectic at the company. Caroline was stressed with a new project at work. Perhaps it wasn't the best timing. I agreed, though disappointed, confident that I would reschedule soon. But he didn't. 6 months passed, and there was no mention of the start of payments as stipulated in the contract. When I finally summoned the courage to mention it in a message, I received a curt reply explaining that the financial situation was still complicated and that I would need a few more months. I agreed, of course. What else could I do a year into the loan still without any payments and with communication? It's becoming increasingly rare. I decided I needed to visit in person. I didn't announce my visit in advance, a decision I would later question. I simply bought a flight, rented a car at the airport, and drove to their home in Atherton on a Sunday afternoon. I rang the doorbell, my heart racing, uncertain about the reception I would receive. The door was opened by a woman I didn't recognize, the nanny I assumed. She seemed confused by my presence, but called Alex, who appeared moments later, clearly shocked to see me. He explained that they were in the middle of a luncheon, that they had guests. Hesitantly, he invited me in, leading me through the immaculate house to the backyard where an elegant meal was underway. Caroline sat at the head of the table, Olivia on her lap, surrounded by about 10 impeccably dressed adults and a few children running round the perfectly manicured lawn. Her expression upon seeing me was one of barely concealed shock, followed by a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Introductions were made quickly. A makeshift seat was set for me at the table, and I tried to integrate into the ongoing conversation about an exclusive resort in Hawaii where apparently several people in attendance owned vacation homes. I felt completely out of place, like an intruder in a world that wasn't my own. Olivia, now almost 2, didn't recognize me, hiding her face in Caroline's neck when I tried to interact with her. Lunch seemed to stretch on forever, each minute a torture of forced smiles and failed attempts at connection. Finally, the guests began to disperse. Carolyn took Olivia inside for her afternoon nap, leaving me finally alone with Alex on the patio. I asked directly about the loan, about the lack of communication, about the growing distance between us. Her answers were evasive at first, blaming work stress, the demands of parenthood, her busy schedule. When I pressed further, specifically mentioning the contract we'd signed, her demeanor changed. She became defensive, almost hostile. He said I was being irrational, that $200,000 was nothing compared to what he had spent on college, that I should understand that their situation was complicated, that not everything revolved around me. I was shocked by the sudden change in tone. I tried to remain calm, reminding him of the importance of that money to my future, of the promise I'd made to repay it. That's when Caroline returned to the courtyard, clearly having overheard part of the conversation. Her gaze was cold, calculating. Bluntly, she said she thought it inappropriate for me to show up unannounced, especially to discuss financial matters during a social event. She suggested that any discussion about the loan should be handled through lawyers if I insisted on overly formalizing a family allowance. The implication was clear in there. View that money wasn't a loan to be repaid, but a donation, a gift, from a mother to her successful son. I tried to explain my position, the importance of that money to my retirement, but I realized I was talking to a wall. Alex and Caroline had constructed a narrative in which I was the villain, the clingy, irrational mother who didn't understand their sophisticated world, who made unreasonable demands, who showed up uninvited and ruined their social events. The argument escalated quickly with raised voices and accusations hurled from both sides. That's when I heard small footsteps approaching. Olivia was standing at the patio door, wide-eyed, hugging a teddy bear. We all stopped immediately, embarrassed that we had allowed the situation to escalate in the presence of the child. Caroline quickly went to her, scooping her up and giving me an accusing look as if I were solely responsible for the disturbance. And then, before I could say anything, Alex uttered the words that opened this story, words I will never forget, words that cut deeper than any knife. "You're nothing but a useless old hag." The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia burst into tears, startled by her father's tone. Caroline quickly led her inside, casting one last look of contempt in my direction. I stood there petrified, unable to process what had just happened. My son, my only son for whom I had sacrificed everything, had called me a useless old woman. Not only that, but he had done so in front of his wife, his daughter, my granddaughter. The humiliation and pain were almost physical, as if something had broken inside my chest. Without another word, I grabbed my bag and left. Alex didn't try to stop me. I drove back to the hotel in a state of shock, tears blurring my vision, hands shaking on the steering wheel. That night was one of the longest of my life. Lying in the impersonal hotel bed, I relived every moment of the argument, every cruel word, every cold look. I questioned every decision I had made throughout my life. The sacrifices for Alex, the mortgage on the house for his education, the recent loan. Had it all been for nothing? Had I raised a man who could look at his mother and see only a useless old woman? The flight back to Chicago the next day was filled with more self-doubt and recriminations. I alternated between intense anger at Alex, at Caroline, at myself for being so naive, and profound sadness, mourning for the relationship I had imagined I had with my son, which I now realized had been largely an illusion. The weeks that followed were a blur of mixed emotions and difficult decisions. I consulted a lawyer about the loan, only to discover that while the contract Alex had sent was technically legal, it would be difficult and expensive to force repayment if he resisted. The lawyer suggested a formal letter as a first step, clearly stating that I expected compliance with the agreed-upon terms. I agreed, though, with a heavy heart. It felt so cold, so impersonal, reducing decades of love and care to a legal dispute over money. The letter was sent. I received no response. I called repeatedly, always going to voicemail. I sent emails that went unanswered. It was as if Alex had decided I no longer existed, that he could simply erase decades of shared history. The pain of this rejection was almost unbearable. I sank into a deep depression, barely able to get out of bed for work, losing interest in the few social activities I used to enjoy. Friends tried to help, offering support and advice, but no one truly understood the depth of the betrayal I felt. How do you explain that your only child, the person you gave everything to, could look you in the eye and see no value? It was at this lowest point that I found Diane. Or rather, Diane found me. She was a new professor in the psychology department at the university where I worked. We met in the faculty lounge, where I was sitting alone during lunch, picking at my food without actually eating. She approached, introduced herself, and asked if she could join me. There was something about her quiet presence and her gentle yet insightful eyes that made me let my guard down. Before I knew it, I was sharing parts of my story with this near stranger. Diane listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that led me to deeper reflections. Toward the end of the conversation, she mentioned a support group she ran for aging parents, dealing with difficult relationships with their adult children. I hesitated at first. Support groups seemed so desperate. Publicly admitting I'd failed as a mother felt like a whole new level of humiliation. But Diane was kind and persistent. It wasn't about failures, she explained. It was about sharing experiences, learning new strategies, finding strength in the collective. I finally agreed to attend a meeting more to please her than because I truly believed it would help. The first meeting was eye-opening. I sat in a circle with 8 other people, mostly women, all with stories painfully similar to mine. Sons-in-law who only showed up when they needed money. Daughters-in-law who kept them away from their grandchildren. Emotional abuse disguised as concern. For their mental capacity. Financial manipulation. Justified as helping manage their resources. These weren't cases identical to mine, but that pattern was unmistakable. Parents who had given everything for their children only to be discarded when they were no longer useful or convenient. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. I wasn't the only one who had lived through this experience, not the only one who felt betrayed, used, discarded. There was something deeply comforting in sharing this burden, in being truly understood. The weekly meetings became an anchor in my life. I learned about healthy boundaries, about codependency, about the dangers of living exclusively for others. I learned that unconditional love doesn't mean allowing yourself to be mistreated. That being a mother doesn't mean being a doormat. Diane, with her background in psychology, brought valuable insights to the group, helping us understand behavioral patterns, recognize manipulation, and build resilience. Slowly, I began to rebuild myself. I rediscovered old interests, literature, gardening, music, that I'd put aside for years to focus exclusively on Alex's needs. I started taking daily walks, eating healthier, sleeping better. I made new friends in the support group, people who understood my journey without elaborate explanations. And gradually the pain began to lessen. It didn't disappear completely. I doubt it ever will, but it became more manageable, less overwhelming. For months after that terrible argument in Atherton, I received an unexpected call. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. To my surprise, it was Caroline. His voice sounded different, less arrogant, more hesitant. He explained that Alex didn't know she was calling, that he would probably be furious if he found out. But she felt she needed to talk to me. Things weren't right, he explained. Alex's company was facing serious problems. A prematurely launched product had developed critical flaws, leading to client lawsuits. Investors were withdrawing support. Shares were plummeting. There were rumors of investigations into questionable accounting practices. Alex was drinking heavily, having angry outbursts at home, frightening Olivia. They were facing the real possibility of losing everything: their house, their cars, their lifestyle. Caroline admitted with evident difficulty that she had been cruel to me, that she had encouraged estrangement between mother and son, that she had seen my attachment to Alex as a threat to the control she exerted over him and his finances. Now, however, she was desperate. Not for her, she insisted, though I doubted it, but for Olivia, who didn't deserve to suffer for her parents' bad decisions. She asked if I would consider helping them again, not financially. This time, she quickly assured me, but with emotional support. Alex needed his mother, she said, though he was too proud to admit it. He needed someone who loved him unconditionally, who could help him find his way back to the person he used to be before money and status corrupted him. I was silent for a long moment, processing everything I'd heard. Part of me wanted to hang up immediately. This was clearly another attempt at manipulation, this time using Olivia as emotional bait. But another part, the part that would always be Alex's mother, felt genuine concern. And there was Olivia to consider, my innocent granddaughter trapped in a situation created by the adults around her. Finally, I responded calmly. I said I'd need to think about it, that I'd call back. Caroline seemed disappointed by the lack of immediate commitment, but she accepted giving me her personal cell phone number so I could call her directly, without going through Alex. After hanging up, I immediately called Diane. I needed an outside perspective, someone who could see the situation without the emotional baggage I carried. We met for coffee and discussed it at length. Diane expressed skepticism about if we questionable ingredients, we questionable ingredients, if you're using like a scanner, a scanner, app, and it's like, we're gonna die. Look at this. Look at this. And we, Code. We all oh. I cut at Clode. Express Clode Quo Quode. Il Quode Re Quo Quo LAL6. Quode Re Quo Re Quode Re Quode Re Quode Re Quode Echo Re Quodes at Quode Re ILZ. Caroline's intentions reminding me of the pattern of behavior they had both consistently demonstrated. At the same time, she acknowledged that crisis situations sometimes create opportunities for genuine change. Ultimately, the decision would have to be mine. I needed to determine what I could offer without compromising my emotional and financial well-being, what boundaries I needed, to set what expectations were realistic. I spent days reflecting, weighing options, and consulting with other support group members who had experienced reconciliations with estranged children. Finally, I came to a decision. I called Carolyn and proposed a meeting on neutral ground, a cafe in the Bay Area away from both their home and potential acquaintances. She readily agreed. On the appointed day, I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a table in the back for privacy. Carolyn showed up promptly, looking very different from the elegant, confident woman I knew. She was makeup-free, her hair carelessly tied back and dark circles evident under her eyes. We got straight to the point. I explained that I was willing to help with very specific conditions. First, any initial contact would be between Alex and me directly, not through her. Second, there would be no additional financial assistance. My resources were stretched, and any support I offered would be purely emotional and practical. Third, and most importantly, I expected a sincere apology for the cruel words and treatment I had received. Without this, there would be no basis for rebuilding. Caroline listened attentively without interrupting. When I finished, she seemed relieved my terms were apparently more reasonable than she'd anticipated. She promised to talk to Alex, prepare him for my call, and ensure he understood the importance of a genuine apology. We parted with a formal handshake, neither of us fully trusting the other, but temporarily united by our shared concern for Alex and Olivia. 3 days later, I received a text from Alex. Simple, direct, can we talk? I responded affirmatively, suggesting a video call so we could see each other while we spoke. He agreed, and we scheduled it for that evening. When his face appeared on my computer screen, I was shocked. Like Carolyn, Alex looked transformed in her unshaven eyes, tired and red. He began the conversation awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable, unsure of how to proceed. Finally, after several false starts, he said the words I needed to hear, "I'm sorry, Mom, for what I said, for what I did, for everything." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. He went on to explain that he had hit rock bottom, his company was failing, his marriage was in crisis, his health was deteriorating. He had been forced to sell his house in Atherton and move to a much smaller apartment. The lifestyle he had built, the image he had so carefully cultivated, was crumbling around him. And in the midst of this breakdown, he realized what truly mattered: family, genuine connections, real values beyond material possessions. He remembered everything I had taught him over the years, lessons he had chosen to ignore in his pursuit of status and wealth. He was deeply ashamed of the man he had become, the choices he had made, the people he had hurt along the way, especially me. Hearing those words, seeing the genuine vulnerability in his eyes, broke something inside me. Tears I'd held back for months finally fell. They weren't just tears of sadness, but also of relief at finally being seen, heard, valued again by my son. Our conversation lasted hours. Alex shared details about the company's collapse, the mistakes he'd made, the painful lessons he was learning. We talked about the future, what lay ahead, how he planned to rebuild not just financially, but as a person, as a father, as a son. I mentioned the support group, how it had helped me process the pain of rejection, find strength in adversity. He listened intently, occasionally asking questions, demonstrating an interest in my life I hadn't seen in years. At the end of the call, I made a proposal. I would travel to California the following week. Not to solve his problems, not to offer magical solutions, but to be present, to offer the kind of support only a mother can give. Alex accepted with palpable gratitude. Before we hung up, he made a promise not only to pay back the loan, Eventually, when he recovered financially, but more importantly, to rebuild our relationship to be the son I deserved, to ensure Olivia knew her grandmother properly. I wanted to believe him. This time, however, my faith was accompanied by a new realism, a more mature understanding, what was possible and what was probable. I didn't expect a miraculous transformation, a return to the idealized son who existed only in my memories. I expected only genuine effort, mutual respect, and the possibility of gradual healing. The trip to California was very different from previous ones. Instead of the mansion in Atherton, I went to a 3-room apartment in Mountain View Comfortable, but without the ostentatious luxury they had become accustomed to. Caroline was clearly uncomfortable with the new reality, trying to keep up appearances even in reduced circumstances. Alex, on the other hand, seemed almost relieved by the simplicity, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, along with his material possessions. Olivia, now almost 3, was a curious and talkative child. Initially shy with me, she soon opened up when I began reading stories to her, drawing together, and playing little games I had played with Alex as a child. The week I spent with them was intensely focused on rebuilding, not only the relationship between Alex and me, but also the family dynamic as a whole. I helped with Olivia while Alex attended meetings with lawyers, investors, and potential employers. In the evenings, we talked at length about the past, the present, and the possibilities for the future. Caroline occasionally joined these conversations, alternating between resentment at their situation and reluctant gratitude for my stabilizing presence. One night while Olivia slept and Caroline was in her room talking to her parents on the phone, Alex and I sat on the apartment's small balcony sharing a bottle of cheap wine. It was then that he made a confession that surprised me. For years, he said he had lived in constant fear of failure, fear of not living up to the sacrifice I had made for him, fear of being exposed as an imposter in the world of privilege he had entered. This fear drove him to increasingly risky decisions at work, to increasingly extravagant spending to keep up appearances to a distancing from his origins that he believed was necessary to be accepted. It was easier to stay away, he explained, than to face the contrast between the life he was living and the values he had been raised with. Easier to pretend I didn't exist than to admit how far he had strayed from the path we had envisioned together. The cruel words that day in Atherton had been directed as much at himself as at rejecting not just his mother, but everything she represented, all the parts of himself that didn't fit the persona he had so carefully constructed. Hearing this explanation didn't erase the pain of the past, but it offered a new perspective, a deeper understanding of the forces that had shaped our choices. Alex wasn't just apologizing, he was trying to understand, trying to articulate the complexity of what had happened between us. And in that effort, I saw glimpses of the person I knew the son I had. Raised, reflective, introspective, capable of growth and change. When I returned to Chicago a week later, I knew I was only at the beginning of a long journey. Rebuilding would take time, require consistent effort from both sides, and face inevitable obstacles along the way. But for the first time in years, I felt genuine hope. Not the naive hope of denial, but the realistic hope that recognizes both challenges and possibilities. Over the next few months, we maintained regular contact, weekly calls, almost daily texts, video calls with Olivia on Sundays. Alex found a new job more modest than his previous position, but stable and with potential for growth. Caroline eventually adjusted to the new reality, finding work at a smaller company where her Stanford degree still opened doors. They began making small but regular payments on the loan. Not the full monthly amount we had initially agreed upon, but a consistent commitment that demonstrated serious intent. More important than the money, however, were the signs of genuine change in our relationship. Alex began consulting me on important decisions, sharing both successes and failures, and showing a genuine interest in my life and well-being. We planned regular visits in both directions, me going to California every few months, them coming to Chicago for holidays and special occasions. Olivia and I developed a close relationship through these visits and regular calls. She now affectionately called me Grandma Maggie, kept special drawings to show me, and asked when we would see each other again. Caroline and I never became best friends, but we developed a cautious mutual respect, an unspoken understanding that we both wanted the best for Alex and Olivia, even if we sometimes disagreed about what that meant. Not everything was perfect, of course. There were occasional relapses into old patterns, moments when Alex seemed distant, when Caroline displayed her old arrogance, when I felt the familiar pang of rejection. The difference was that now we had the tools to recognize these patterns, to discuss them openly, to correct course before small deviations became insurmountable chasms. The support group remained an important part of my life, a place where I could process these complexities, receive honest feedback, and celebrate small victories. Diane became a close friend and valuable advisor, helping me navigate the ups and downs of reconciliation with realism and compassion. And then 2 years after that terrible day in Atherton, I received news that changed everything again. Carolyn was pregnant with her second child. Alex called me personally to share the news, his voice brimming with emotion. He asked if I would consider spending an extended period with them after the birth, not just for a brief visit, but to truly help in those first few weeks, to be present in a way I hadn't been able to be when Olivia was born. I accepted immediately, deeply touched by the invitation, by the implicit trust, by the chance to experience this precious moment I had missed the first time. I began making plans, reorganizing my life for a prolonged absence, anticipating the joy of holding a newborn again, of watching Olivia become a big sister, of being truly present in my family's life. The day before I was to leave for California, while I was packing, the phone rang. It was Alex again. Initially, I thought it was about logistical details of my visit, perhaps a schedule change or last-minute requests. But her voice sounded different, nervous, hesitant, as if she were about to ask something difficult. And it was, Caroline had unexpectedly lost her job. The company was facing financial difficulties and had made significant staff cuts. With the baby on the way and Olivia needing stability, they were considering a drastic change, leaving California, returning to the Midwest, starting over in a place with a more reasonable cost of living. Specifically, they were considering Chicago. The possibility took my breath away. My son, my daughter-in-law, my grandchildren living in the same city as me, maybe even nearby. Seeing Olivia regularly, not just in occasional visits or video calls. Being present for the new baby's growth from the start. Being a real grandmother on a daily basis, not just a distant figure seen occasionally. It was almost too good to be true. And then came the request, would it be possible for them to stay with me temporarily while they looked for a place of their own, while Alex looked for work in Chicago, while they got settled. And my house wasn't large, 3 modest bedrooms in a middle-class neighborhood, but it could accommodate them temporarily if I were willing. The old Maggie would have said yes immediately, without question, eager to please, to be helpful, to keep her son close at all costs. But the new Maggie, the woman who had learned painfully about boundaries and self-respect, paused. I considered the implications for people soon to be 5 in a space designed for 1 or 2. The loss of privacy, of established routines, of independence. The potential conflicts inevitable when adults with complicated histories live in forced proximity. I asked how long they had been thinking, what their concrete plans were, how they would contribute financially while they were with me. Alex seemed surprised by the detailed questions, perhaps expecting the immediate agreement as before. But he quickly adjusted, answering clearly and honestly, they were thinking 3 months. At most, they would contribute proportionately to household expenses, they would help with maintenance and chores, they would respect my space and privacy. Most importantly, they understood it would be a temporary situation, a stepping stone to their own independence, not a permanent solution. After a few more questions, establishing some basic parameters, I agreed. Not with blind enthusiasm or a desperate desire to please, but with our eyes open, aware of the challenges and also the potential rewards. We set a moving date 2 weeks after the phone call, enough time for me to prepare the house and for them to organize the cross-country move. The weeks that followed were intense, cleaning out closets to make space, reorganizing rooms, buying additional supplies, preparing for the imminent arrival of the extended family. Friends in the support group expressed concerns, reminding me of past patterns, warning of potential pitfalls. I listened attentively, grateful for the outside perspective, but confident in the decision I had made. It wasn't naivete or desperation driving my choice, but a careful assessment of risks and benefits, a commitment to clear boundaries, and a willingness to give reconciliation a genuine chance. Finally, the day arrived. I waited anxiously on the porch, watching the street for the rental car that would bring my extended family. When they finally showed up, it was a surreal moment to Alex driving Carolyn in the passenger seat, visibly pregnant. Olivia waving enthusiastically from the back seat, an image that had seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. The first few weeks of cohabitation were an adjustment for everyone. Small frictions over bathroom use, food preferences, television volume, bedtimes. Moments of tension when old patterns threatened to resurface, a condescending comment from Caroline. A defensive response from Alex, my own tendency to overindulge to avoid conflict. But there were also moments of genuine connection, family dinners around the table, late-night reading sessions. With Olivia, deep conversations with Alex after everyone else was asleep. Caroline and I developed a routine of making breakfast together every morning, a quiet time before the rest of the house woke up, where we slowly built a more authentic relationship based not only on our connection with Alex, but on mutual respect as women. Alex found work surprisingly quickly, a position at a small but promising startup, not as glamorous as his California heyday, but with real potential and a healthier corporate culture. Caroline, now in her third trimester, focused on preparing for the baby and helping Olivia adjust to her new school, planning to resume her job search a few months after the birth. Together, they began looking for nearby apartments, close enough for frequent visits, but giving everyone the space they needed to live independently. Benjamin was born on a snowy December morning, healthy and strong, with the same dark hair Alex had had as a baby. Unlike Olivia's birth, I was there from the very first moment at the hospital during labor, holding the newborn minutes after his arrival, helping Carolyn through the challenging first days of breastfeeding and sleep deprivation. It was precious time, a chance to experience what I had missed before, to bond with my grandson from the very beginning. A month after Benjamin's birth, Alex and Caroline found an apartment, not large but cozy and functional, just a 10-minute drive from my house. The move was bittersweet. On the one hand, I missed the constant buzz of activity, the sounds of small footsteps in the hallway, even the minor irritations of close quarters. On the other, I recognized the importance of independence, the chance for each family unit to establish its own rhythm and routines. Plus, proximity meant we could see each other often. Sunday dinners, afternoons in the park with the kids, impromptu babysitting sessions when Alex and Carolyn needed alone time. Of course, life never follows a perfect, predictable path. There were ongoing challenges, periods of financial hardship when the original loan given Alex needed to be renegotiated yet again, moments of tension when old resentments occasionally surfaced, differences of opinion about children. But unlike in the past, we face these challenges with open communication, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to preserving the connection we had so painfully rebuilt. The support group remained an important part of my life, not just as a place to process hardships, but increasingly as a space to share successes, to offer hope to others still in the early stages of grief and despair. Eventually, I began facilitating a group of my own, using my experience to help other aging parents navigate complex relationships with adult children. This work brought new purpose to my life, a way to transform the pain of the past into something meaningful and useful. And that brings us to the present. 5 years after that terrible day in Atherton when my son called me a useless old woman and cast me out of his life. Olivia is now 8, Benjamin is 5, and recently a late surprise little Sarah, just 6 months old. My 3 grandchildren are the joy of my life, each with a distinct personality, each bringing a unique form of joy. Alex and Caroline bought a modest but comfortable home in the same neighborhood as mine, prioritizing family closeness over the status that had once been so important to them. Our relationship isn't perfect. There are still occasional moments of tension. We're still learning. We're still growing. But it's real based on truth and mutual respect, not illusions or manipulation. And what about that loan, the source of so much pain and conflict? Alex is still paying it off in modest but consistent installments. It will probably take years to pay it off completely. But honestly, money stopped being the central issue a long time ago. What matters is the commitment, the integrity, the respect. That payments represent not the amount itself, but the recognition of what is right, what is owed. If there's one lesson I've learned along this journey, it's that true love doesn't mean the absence of boundaries. On the contrary, healthy love requires clear boundaries, mutual respect, and honesty, even when it hurts. I've learned that total sacrifice isn't a virtue when it leads to exploitation, that helping doesn't. Mean enabling destructive dependency, that forgiving doesn't mean pretending the past didn't happen. I've also learned that people can change not easily, not quickly, not without setbacks and struggles, but genuinely, deeply, permanently. My son isn't perfect, never will be. He carries the scars of his past choices just as I do mine. But he's a better man now than he was 5 years ago. More aware, more grateful, more authentic. A present and loving father, a caring son, a human being who strives every day to be the best version of himself. And me, I'm a different woman than I was before. Stronger, wiser, with a sense of identity that goes beyond motherhood. I've learned to value myself, to stand up for my limits, to seek joy and meaning in many areas of life. I've discovered that I'm not just Alex's mother, I'm Maggie, a complete and valuable person in my own right. If you're experiencing a similar situation, if a son or daughter has treated you like a bank instead of family, if they've used and discarded you, if cruel words have been directed at you by those who should love and respect, know that you're not alone. There are others like you. There are support groups. There are professionals who can help. And know that setting boundaries isn't selfish shits, a necessary act of self-preservation, and paradoxically often the first step toward healthier relationships. Your age doesn't diminish your value as a human being. Your past sacrifices don't obligate you to continue being exploited in the present. You deserve respect, consideration, and genuine love, not just as a mother or father, but as a person. If my story touched you in any way, please leave a like so I can reach more people going through similar situations. In the comments, share your own experience if you feel comfortable, or simply leave a word of support for others reading. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of overcoming growth and personal transformation. Together we form a supportive community where no one needs to face these challenges alone. Thank you for listening, for allowing me to share this journey with you. Always remember, it's never too late to start over, to set healthy boundaries, to demand the respect you deserve. Dignity has no expiration date, and true love for yourself and others always includes mutual respect.